I have a message for the Illuminati or whatever group that is destroying every part of my being to try to change me, to try to make, they call it self-improvement, to be attacked, whoever's doing this, and to destroy me, to try to get me to embrace demons. Now I'm being told, leave my husband, go have a baby overseas, or agree to be bitten by a vampire and murdered. God, what? It's like somebody wrote a horror fiction story and they decided to make it reality. That's what this seems like. It's beyond mind-boggling and evil. It's just stupidity, and I can't go along with anything that is as bizarre as the time I heard in the news that all these cult people decided to take poison because they thought aliens were going to come and get them. This is beyond like Hare Krishna and other weird cults that I've heard about. I am the same person today as I was the day I was born. I'm in a bigger body. I'm more corrupt. I'm still the same soul. My favorite thing at church when I was little, at Vacation Bible School, was to listen to that song, Everything's Beautiful, it says Jesus loves little children, all little children of the world. I would cry at songs like If I Had a Hammer. When I was 8 years old, I got this song for my birthday and it made me cry. And Condo El Paso was my favorite song at age 8. My very favorite. It's still my favorite. Made me cry. I was always crying. Always crying. I came into this world crying. It's because I was super sensitive as a child. It wasn't. I had to cry every day all through elementary school, and it wasn't because I was a brat and I threw temper tantrums. It was because I was highly emotional and I had this deep-rooted sorrow I did not understand, and I would just cry and cry and cry because life really puzzled me and mystified me, and it made me feel such sadness and sorrow in the world that I saw at an early age that most people don't even see in adulthood. And it was enough to keep me in a childhood somber state. And sometimes I used to think when I was little I'd feel so much better if I could have a good cry every single day of the week. But if I miss one day, it's like my tear ducts, my face would swell because something about my autonomic nervous system, they said I had a trigger sensitive autonomic nervous system that you could fight or flight. The slightest thing, and my body would kind of set off the sprinkler system and say fire if there wasn't one, because I was like overly sensitive, a nervous child. They wanted to put me on nerve medicine because I was so worried about things all the time. I'd either bite my nails down to the quick or I would shake. It had nothing to do with anything in the home. I was just born this way. I know I was 6 weeks early, and in those days I was stuck at a hospital that had a very bad reputation. I was stuck in a loud incubator. And then after I got home, I was sick for several months, and I had colic. And I kept a high fever, and they had to take me to the emergency room 2 or 3 times because I would try to swallow my tongue because of high fevers. That was my introduction to life, but believe me, as a child, I was babied and spoiled, loved, oh my God, by the most gifted nurturers, loved completely. But it was a sorrow I had. No matter what good was going good in my childhood, I would cry for sorrow. And so I felt a very close attachment to God at a young age. And now today, I learned years ago to hide that sorrow and to hide my sensitivity. But I've always been vulnerable as to feeling for other people, empathy, and letting myself be hurt so many times because I would feel other people's pain as if I was that person, and I would trust people. And I had always had a good head on my shoulders until I met some bad people that sent me an invitation to Writers' Conference, and I let them they got in my brain and they pretty much did my thinking for me. And I remember I hadn't really discovered myself, and I met Bob, and he was just the dream come true. But I was young, I didn't know myself, I was 25 when I met him. And, he already had a pre-made family. He had 5 kids. One of them lived out of state. The others, I remember the first time I got to meet one of his kids. He was in a serious war with his ex-wife, who had a lot of resentment from the divorce. And I remember the guy she married threatened to beat him up. First time he went to get his 4-year-old, who was living with her. He had the other kids, but she was supposed to pick them up every month or so. Most of the time she didn't show up. And they were supposed to swap kids, but she did put in writing that she gave him custody. And then she just told him if he stayed out of her hair and never asked to visit his 4-year-old, he could keep the other 4, and that would be that. She said kids didn't fit into her lifestyle, and those were her words. And this war between, she was staying at a Secret Service agent's house on her street that used to be Jenna Bush's bodyguard. And she kind of got her little first wife's club, and she kind of got this guy to try to turn him against my husband. So the first time he went to see his 4-year-old, I was in shock. The kids come in the house and they said, Ron tried to beat Dad up. And I said, what? And I never met the ex or her husband or the Secret Service agent. And I said, what do you mean? They said, yeah, Dad said, I want to see my daughter. And he said, no, you're not. And Dad grabbed her because he has visitation rights. And Ron tried to beat him up. And that was the first introduction I had to his kids and meeting the 4-year-old Sasha. And but I learned that my husband was just a saintly kind of guy who had been just misled and abused for so many years, that whenever I got more close to the kids and everything, I could see everyone was being manipulated by one person. Everyone was being manipulated. But being a new bride, I didn't understand any of this, because I didn't understand I had any power until I went to see Dr. Melvin Lansky for a year and a half. And he said that I was what you call the Southern sufferers. I was the martyr type. He said the type that thought the men were superior to women and the men had the power and I had absolutely no power. So all through the first 2 years of my marriage, it was horrifying. I had never been to court, but that woman was always making up stories just to try to keep my husband on the end of her leash. And the children were always in the middle getting hurt, and she was always trying to teach them to lie. And the stepdad was trying to beat my husband up every time he went to see him. I remember going to a deposition, and he tried to beat him up at the deposition. I remember hiring my husband a bodyguard, even attend one of their weddings. My husband's a healer, but this man just wants to try to keep him from his kids. And so I was shocked. I was in post-traumatic stress. I remember it got so bad after 2 years of her filing court motions, of me being scared to death every time my husband had to go to court, because I had never been to court. I had never, and the thought of having these phony things said about your spouse and you was traumatizing in itself, without her friends breaking in our house and stuff, just like it was still hers, so I just wanted to support my husband, but I remember I got so traumatized that for the one night, I woke up and I was seeing spiders on the ceiling and on the bed, and I was sleepwalking and I was screaming. I felt like I was attacked by spiders. And before I married my husband, I have a dream of water moccasins in a murky water, and it was a warning dream. It was a warning dream. And I love my husband dearly, but I didn't know the kind of evil situation I was stepping into. And I mean, when you're dealing with Secret Service agents that live on your street, and you're dealing with a lot of government type people and living in a place called Owl Creek for government, you right there are inviting some darkness into your life, I think. And I just didn't know evil. I had never understood it. But I swear to God, when I got married, I knew evil, and I've had evil in my life ever since. I've known it in the worst way imaginable. Because of connections, I'm afraid it's gone all the way up to the top, this evil. And it's kind of like once I get exposed to evil, next thing you know, I'm getting invites to conferences and stuff, and everybody there is affiliated with the same type of group, and they're evil. But when I went to Dr. Melvin Lansky, he said that I had surrendered my power because it's the way I thought, as a Southern woman, you're supposed to be. But when I did marry my husband, I said goodbye to the whole world, because I thought, I had this biblical belief, I guess kind of like Muslim women, Your husband's your world. You bow down to your husband. Your husband's the boss, you know. And my husband was the greatest man I ever hoped to meet. It was just that the extra baggage that was hurting it. And if it was just me and the kids and him, we had a great relationship and we would have lived happily ever after. We had a strong bond after so many months. The love was flowing. We took trips together. We had sit-down meals. We went out to eat every Thursday. We went to amusement parks. We were roller skating every week. We had parties for every occasion. But some other person who didn't want to be a good parent resented my husband because he was the perfect parent. And I met some of my husband's friends, and we went to Peter, Paul, and Mary concert, and they were from his hometown. And they said he was the greatest dad ever. And at the times that she would leave him, he'd come to once to a picnic, toting a kid on each hip. They said in a garbage bag full of diapers, because he was always the caretaker that put his kids first, made the sacrifices. And at the wedding, people that came was talking about they loved the bond he had with his kids. And it killed me to see somebody out of spite destroy it. But when I got to know some of his friends that were real close to him in his hometown, that knew him very well, they said they knew when they knew this person, she was very jealous of my husband. So she would always try to keep his children from having a good relationship with him. It was jealousy to take his kids from the best dad that anybody could ever have in the world. A dad that made him his whole world. He made them his whole world. He took them boating on the weekends. But one person's bitterness can poison her young and program them, just like so many government people are doing to military soldiers. And you can see why this country has fallen apart. Without a solid family unit based on truth and Christ and things like that, it's going to fall apart. But when this group tells me I got to change and become evil, I say no, you need to go back to your childhood. You need to go back to the beginning. Because when I was little, I was impressioned at a young age to love and be generous and care about humanity, and that is my heart. And I remember wanting to learn manners. Nobody taught me manners, but I wanted to be so prim and proper. And I remember telling kids in 1st and 2nd grade, I'm not going to join your petty group because I don't want to be mean. And I'm not going to single out other kids and have this little group. To me, a cult is the same thing. It's a group of people who want to single out the rest of humanity. And when you tell me join your cult, I'm saying God says he offers the kingdom of heaven. He's got the keys. But he says that he decides who's welcome, and he does not discriminate by race, wealth, anything. And God says, be like the little children if you want to get to the kingdom of heaven. I want to be like a child in the mind. I want to have the values of a child. I want to be loving and concepting like a child. I am a mature adult, and I only fight when I'm attacked, but my nature is to love. I have been through so much stuff, through angry people, vengeful people, violent people, that the whole country has become a cesspool of rage and evil by dysfunctional, mentally ill, sick people that have no faith in Christ. If you had faith in Christ, then you would always try to go back to your roots, to when you were born. You have had children, many of you. You see how those babies come into this world. If you make them flawed and defective, that's your problem. But when you tell me as a grown, sane adult who has tried through everything to get closer to God, you've tried to take every virtue I have out of me, but there's one thing I thank God for today that has actually improved through all the shit you put me through. It's my faith. And they say faith can move mountains. So I am very grateful that there's one thing I still have, and that is my faith. But I tell you what, when you tell me have a little baby, do you know my fairy tale dreams were crushed years ago when I saw children abused by a parent that was only thinking of themselves. And my husband decided he wasn't going to have children with me in the beginning because he did not want his other children to feel like he betrayed them. But she'd had one abortion, 2 miscarriages, and she ended up with, I think, count those 7 kids. And my husband still did not want other children. But eventually he changed his mind several years later, and we went to a fertility clinic and tried to reverse his vasectomy. But he'd had 2 vasectomies because his first one didn't take, and that's how they had their 5th child. But when I saw that, the man I love, we couldn't have kids together, and now I see how I am being told to sign a contract for Satan, and I'm being told to lose my identity and my brain and become something evil. I know the world has fallen, and I know those people are sick. I don't care if they have clout and fame. They have to have really been messed up by the world to be that unbalanced. Life is not a fiction story. Life is not a game. Life is not a movie. People have feelings, and scars are everlasting. And when you hurt somebody's soul and mind and body, that not only causes trauma, it creates an everlasting impact. And I will always be the deep thinker. I will always be sensitive. And I know I got away from that when I married an older man who was almost 18 years older than me. And I got in the middle of a brawl with a woman who was very conniving when I was the most innocent I've ever been in my life. I had no idea how that people would plot and scheme, and how the court system could be used, and how children can be taught to lie. And I had no awareness of any of this stuff. But when I saw my doctor, he kept telling me I had a power I didn't know I had. And by the time he got done, I was just so strong and so powerful. He says he gives me the credit that I was a good patient and I learned well. But I gave him the credit because every time I talked to him, he would never let me put myself down, which I was had in the habit of doing. He would never let me, ever say I'm sorry, or he made me realize that by doing that, you're programming yourself to be belittled and overlooked. And he kept telling me I surrendered my power to everyone, a power I never knew I had. And he said it was pushing me into depression because I had been taken advantage of by never knowing my true inner self. So when he programmed my mind for 1.5 years, not letting me become weak and feel like I had no protection, I became almost too domineering. And my husband saw a new side of me he had never seen before. And I realized that I have just as much power as a man. And I never would have thought that my whole life. And I realized that I don't have to be taken advantage of by this group. And I don't care if they do put Holocaust symbols everywhere. And I don't care if they do have these energy weapons. Once I discovered my inner power, I cannot be abused. Not mentally, not physically. It's not being selfish. And when you say, oh, but you're going to improve and be happy, if you change who God made and try to change my soul, I will not be happy. I will be hollow. And another thing, I don't believe I can have a child. I already explained to you why. I already explained this to you why I can't. But now that I'm so old, even if I wasn't married to my husband, I'm 53, it would not be fair to any baby for a woman who has been so traumatized for so many years and so abused by weapons to ever try to carry a baby in a body that is so bad now, eat up with arthritis and spine damage and damage to my reproductive system caused by these military-type Nazi weapons, and me feeling so brainless that this group tells me I can't even function anymore from the brain damage. It would not be fair to any baby to ever be in my womb. That's the truth. And only an insane person who wants to see me suffer would ever even mention the idea to me. Because if you have to have a world that is full of weapons and violence and greed, then you don't need children. I have a heart. I was always looking for the promised land to have children. I wanted like a place like Garden of Eden. I mean, before the devil came. I wanted a place over the rainbow, like the Dorothy song. That's why I went to Australia when I was young. I was looking for the promised land. I saw Australia change. It got Americanized, and when I went back 10 years later, all the little children I used to adore that would wear their little uniforms that were so prim and proper and perfect, half of them had got into drugs. They had mohawks. There were American billboards everywhere. Hollywood had polluted the whole place. They had just polluted the whole town. I won't just say America, I will say Hollywood. Hollywood destroyed the whole world and brought evil and crime and now Satanism everywhere. I saw Australia change. It used to be like America was 200 years ago when I first went there. When I was 18, I went there looking to have a future somewhere. I even thought I wanted to immigrate there when the family there said they'd sponsor me, Robert Pearson's family. But then when I came back here, I couldn't leave my family. I hated the culture here, but I couldn't leave my family. And I used to cry every day and look at all my Australian souvenirs because I wanted children. I wanted a wholesome life. My favorite thing to do was to go out with the family to social gatherings where all the women got together and we fixed dinner. And then the teenagers, we all dressed up for parties. And we all bonded. And they talked about, did things that people do when they get married and have a good lifestyle. My dream would have been to get married and have a sheep station in the outback and make my children's clothes by an old Singer sewing machine, not let them be spoiled by city slickers, get them to go to school over the radio, and that would have been my dream. It was never to be famous, rich, successful, actress and art writer. I mean, it was always my dream to be a writer. But I really deeply wanted kids. And I used to take care of so many kids for so many different families when I was younger that when I met one of the ladies that I went up to New York with her when she relocated to go work at a ocean place there, and I had taken care of her 3 sons all through high school and then my first year out of high school. And when she talked to me, she said, I cannot believe 10 years later you don't have an orphanage full of kids or you're not a nun, because I always knew you had a gift with kids, and I thought that you would either be a nun or have an orphanage full of kids. But I had enough of a heart to not want to bring children up in the world like today. And I wrote a silly little poem my first week in Australia, something about if something was free and I could be a pink fairy of the sea, I'd dance and flutter amongst the land of crystal spray and marmalade glee. Just thoughts I had when I was like 18 about always having a dream place to live, because I was never happy with the real world. And that's because I could always pick up on the evil in it. But all I can say is to the people that are trying to get me, these monsters, if you had Christ in your heart and you knew what love was and you had a good soul, you wouldn't be trying to get me and to force me to becoming something I wasn't. If you wanted there to be a good future, you would put Christ first. If you wanted to go to heaven, you would see the good in people and try to get people to be like little children again. You would stop the war and violence and perversion. And and I just don't think that you're ever going to reach that point. I think you're going to damn yourselves. I think you're going to damn everybody else. I think you're going to destroy the world. I think these weapons are going to destroy the world. I think the microchips, the mind programming, your stupid ideas, your dark thoughts about the future, your hunger and craving is satanic. The beast destroys everything. I think your will destroy everything, because you're losing all control of yourselves. You can't control your minds anymore. You can't control your bodies.